Yeah. What's up? What's going on? What's happening out there? Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this fine Wednesday edition. Good morning, Hannas. That's me. What's going on? I am Hannas, aka Nikki Hannas. It's my little morning talk show, my little morning YouTube project, if you will. You can find this live at some point, some mornings. I'm still working a perfect schedule out. But you can find this live on YouTube at BS with Hannas. Goes out to Apple Podcasts, so on and so forth. You can find my music, heavy blues metal. You just heard a little bit of it. You can hear it properly. NikkiBHannas.com, NikkiBHannas.bandcamp.com, NikkiBHannas on all streaming services. Let me check my audio real quick. Oh, nice. The technical difficulties have been slightly alleviated. Yeah, happy Wednesday. It's a fine Wednesday morning. The whole premise of this show is I like to get up and take a walk. I like to walk and I ponder. I like to read some good shit. I like to talk to other people, go lift some weights, go to work. It's a Wednesday, and that's what I'm going to do today. Get up and walk, think, read, think, talk, think as I talk, chew gum and fucking take a walk at the same time, whatever. So that's what I'm doing. What am I thinking about today? I was listening to something by the dude, Bedros Keuilian, who's a YouTube guy, a fitness guy, one of those personal development guys. And I like Bedros a lot. Bedros is cool. I've listened to a lot of his stuff. I was listening to something he put out the other day. The whole subject was, the basic gist of it is ignoring all the noise we find out here in life, all the noise we find out here in this world, all the distractions, all the bullshit, all the unimportant, inconsequential, just tedious, nonsensical things that flutters all around us. And Bedros was talking, he was emphasizing the idea of ignoring all the whispers of stupid shit and listen to the shout, whatever kind of shout you got in you. You know, if you need to do something, his example was, if you need to, let's just use the gym, right? Let's just use getting in shape. You don't really need to focus on what workout program you're doing or what diet you're going to follow exactly. You just need to fucking get in there and fucking lift some weights and fucking eat the right shit, or at least don't continue shoveling down the wrong shit. So that's what Bedros was talking about. But something he had said in there that I really liked was the idea of not being a cautionary tale, but being a good example. To be a good example as opposed to a cautionary tale. I've always liked that phrase, a cautionary tale. For one, the first time it ever stuck out to me was, it's a thrash metal song by a band called Sabbath, an old British band. Andy Sneap was the guitar player in Sabbath, and he ended up producing a lot of high-level metal records. But their first album, History of a Time to Come, the song A Cautionary Tale, was also my introduction to the story of Faust, Dr. Faustus, which was a play by Goethe. The idea of Dr. Faust effectively selling his soul to Mephistopheles, making that bad bargain, if you will. That was the first time I'd ever heard of a cautionary tale. And inadvertently, I think in my life, I've grown to reflect that in many, many ways. You know, a lot of my songs that I write about in Nikki Hannas, I was showing one of my buddies last night some of the new shit as I'm planning, a couple projects in the works. But I was showing my new stuff to one of my homies, and he was listening to the lyrics, and he's like, "It sounds like a journal entry." And yeah, in many ways, dude, a lot of my music is not too far from a journal entry. I don't write songs about society per se. I don't write songs about slaying dragons. And both of those subjects have a home in the world of metal. They have a home in the world of fucking like high art, quote unquote. And there's a lot of great metal songs about society and war and dragon slaying and monster slaying and so on and so forth. So there's love for that. Plenty of that in literature. That's not where my music comes from. My music is very personal to me. It's not dissimilar from a journal entry. And as I'm in that position where I'm writing songs or, journaling, if you will, putting it to the soundtrack of my life is kind of how I look at it. That's a blues thing in many ways. The punchlines are just a little different in my shit. But a lot of that is the self awareness of potentially being a cautionary tale. When I find myself running a burger shop, and I got young bucks that I'm fucking taking under my wing for better or worse, there's a huge element to me that it's like, yeah, do this, don't do that. I'm not going to tell you what to do at least, but definitely don't go do that. Like you guys are going to college next year, have your fun and shit, but be aware of what you guys are doing, act with intention. It took me till I'm in my 30s to begin to learn this stuff, you know, learn from me, trying to pivot into being a fucking decent example, and that comes with that's a big can of worms to open up in one's life. It puts a certain type of, I look at it almost as duty, not really an obligation, but it kind of is. If you think too deeply into things, you can't really unthink what you thought. And sometimes that's the inception idea, the law of exposure. Once you're kind of aware of something, that people are watching you and that you are setting some type of precedent, whether you want to or not, whether you run from it or not, that shit is very, very important. The idea of being a cautionary tale versus being a good example. And I think that stuck out to me, worth talking about. I think it's a constant work too. It's a fucking constant work for me, at least. And maybe that's the neurotic parts and the fucking spastic parts, those things that are still maturing inside of me. But it's like even just the gym, it's like if I take a day off, that justifies a day off to somebody else, potentially, maybe not likely. And if they're going to take the day off, they're going to take the day off anyway. And I'm not even saying that there's no advantage to days off. I mean, go to the professionals for that shit. But to me, I don't want it, because in my experience, one day off will turn into two, which will turn into three, which will turn into a week, which will disrupt the whole habit. That takes a lot longer to build than it does to break. And that's I think that's super significant. I went to in any event, moving on from that, from that idea, kind of related, but not totally. I went to a fucking AA meeting yesterday. I like going to AA meetings. I don't think I need them necessarily to maintain sobriety. I'm very fortunate, I think, in my positioning and how I formulated my sobriety. So I don't really need it in that way, but a lot of people do. And I find them nourishing. I find them enlightening. I find a sense of peace when I step into a room and just listen. I don't often share, but if I aspire to be a fucking speaker one day, I should start talking in real life instead of just in my little room to a YouTube video, which I'm getting more comfortable at. So it's all in alignment anyway. So it's all good. This is the actual steps that begets growth. But I went to a meeting and, you're not supposed to repeat what you hear in the rooms. You're not supposed to talk about people that you see in the rooms. That's why it's all first names basis. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous for a reason. But, we're on the internet and I don't know motherfuckers' names anyway. There's one dude, he shared something that is, I guess his mom had just died at like 92. And this was like an old head. He must have been in, I would say, his 60s, and he was dealing with that. And I'm thinking, I don't know how many years sober this guy's had, but then you get them big fucking life events and that'll reframe a lot of things. And that's why the constant practice of virtues, I suppose, is important. If he was struggling with what was going on in his life, and, heart goes out to that guy because that's fucking hard shit to deal with, man. But it's also something that comes to everybody. Even if your case is unique in the grand scheme of life, it doesn't mean it's a special thing, It just means you got to do what you got to do and get through it in the best way possible, And if this old man said he had to go to a meeting just to deal with what he was going through and stay sober for that day to turn into the next day, I'm sitting there and it's like, you go to the meetings. When I go to the meetings, you can always tell there's people in the back, the young dudes who I assume are on probation or court order or something like that. They have to go to meetings and they have to participate in sobriety programs. But they don't care. They're not there for any real reason. And then you can see the lifers. You can see the people who are obviously running the show and, they're doing the meeting and who's speaking, who's chairing. And then you can see the kind of mid-range people of newbies, people that kind of go and just chill and listen. And I find, the idea of it is to be welcome. I like going and listening and learning. It's a nice, I rarely will leave a meeting when I choose to go and be like, man, that was a waste of time. There's a certain kind of peace that comes with it. I don't want to say it's like going to church, but it's not dissimilar from that peaceful kind of inspiring energy to just be absorbed through people speaking in one room together, people in a room with a common, cause or mission, I guess, you know. And those are all people that the shit, if you're listening to people talk, some people have like this man right here, he's struggling with something and is actively reaching out to get support in that moment, in that day, in what he's immediately going through. And then there's other old timers that just exist as cautionary tales, because on one hand, that guy mentioned that because he needed it, right? But the guy who was giving the main talk of the meeting, he was talking about how they used to go to concerts and how they all loved music, but they would go and when it shifted somehow, eventually it shifted from going to a concert to enjoy the show to a reason to drink. So what's the fucking order of priority there? Are you going to a concert to enjoy the concert, or are you going to the concert as a place to drink, a cool place to drink? And that, to me, that ties into like everything, intention and presentness and all those things. So it's like it was interesting because it's like half and half. On one hand, it's really dark and like heavy and significant and talk because then everyone else is responding and, sharing their stories and dealing with death, and their encounters with that in their lives and how it has impacted or supported or destroyed or whatever, insofar as their sobriety is concerned. But then at the same time, that's one hand. On the other hand, it's lighthearted, like, yeah, we used to go to the Spectrum to go to concerts, and my buddies left me there a bunch of times. And I'm thinking to myself, shit, there's many concerts that I don't remember, and I'm not alone in this room. Motherfuckers going out here just getting after it and fucking partying too hard. Love the music so much that you don't remember it the next day. And it's very interesting to me like that. Right up there with what I heard Bedros on the internet say in the morning, being a cautionary tale versus a good example. And I think that's super important. Matters of the spirit, matters of life. That's what I'm fucking mostly thinking about. That's what I'm mostly thinking about. I just started reading another book since I finished Embrace the Suck. This one is called Revisioning Spirit by a guy named Mark Neville. I never heard of this guy. He's got a bunch of titles after his name. From what I briefly read about him in his own introduction, he worked in like the hospice industry. So he's pretty close to some significant heavy mortality dealing with things. But it seems to be more of a philosophy driven kind of approach than anything. I literally looked up on Amazon. I looked up books about thumos, about the Greek idea of thumos, spiritedness, passion. And basically what this guy, Mark Neville, is positing is a lens of philosophy called Thumotics, which, to use his words, is an umbrella term that covers a number of theoretical and practical domains based on a revisioning of spirit, which is thumos, which includes a clear definition of spirit as well as a new science, therapy, and spirituality of spirit. Yeah, it caught my interest. I'm not very far along into it. But right out the gate, when he's laying out the basic gist of what he's going to posit through his book in his revisioning of spirit, he says Thumotics is in favor of, to use his idea of Thumotics in favor of what he calls monocrats, which I never heard the term monocrat before, but it seems to be a mix of monarchy and like autocrat, the ruling systems of the brain. So the monocrats that he uses, he says, use Thumotics in favor of the monocrats, which dictate how we know, and what we value. So it like quickly dives into like pretty, not necessarily deep waters of philosophy, but philosophy 101 at least. He says that the monocrats dictate how we know, which includes rationalism, empiricism, and religiosity. The monocrats dictate what we know, which would be idealism, realism, materialism, dualism, and psychologism. Psychologism. There it is. Pronunciation, it's hard. And then the monocrats also dictate what we value, which would be humanism, individualism, hedonism, and metaphysicalism. So that's very interesting. That's very interesting. The idea of defining what the spirit actually is and how that can be applied into a useful lens that supersedes all those things. And motherfuckers have been discussing and debating and fighting and writing fucking treatises and counter treatises for years about all those things: rationalism, empiricism, religiosity, idealism, realism, materialism, dualism, psychologism, humanism, individualism, hedonism, metaphysicalism. All these isms. All these isms. And Thumotics apparently is the superior of them all. I don't know. I'm excited to keep reading through it, though. It's very interesting. It's most interesting to me right now. And then he said it starts with wonder. The wonder that we are alive rather than not. The most basic fucking dichotomy that exists. Being alive instead of not alive. Starting there. So that's what I'm thinking about today. Anyway, I'm going to roll out of here. 16 minutes in. That's good enough on this fine Wednesday morning. Thank you guys for hanging out with me. It's been a fine Wednesday edition. BS with B. Hannas. Bullshitting with B. Hannas in the morning. That's me. Nikki B. Hannas. You can find this on YouTube. BS with B. Hannas. I'll shoot it out to Spotify Podcast, Apple Podcast, Amazon Audible, so on and so forth. You can find the music. Heavy blues metal. I don't know what kind of isms are in my music. I'll have to think about that. I'm sure there's some smart ass fucking responses for that one, though. Heavy blues metal, some hard rock and roll. NikkiBHannas.com, NikkiBHannas.bandcamp.com, Nikki B. Hannas on all streaming services. Today is shoulder day. Fucking A. One love. Keep it real. Ride that hype train. Peace. I'm walking that fine line.